My name is Lynn Henry, and I'm 32 years old. I never imagined that grief would feel like standing on unstable ground, quiet, hollow, waiting to collapse beneath you. When my father died, it felt like the one solid thing in my life had been pulled out from under me. But I didn't yet understand that losing him wasn't the worst part. The worst part was discovering what his death unlocked in the people who were supposed to love me. Let me take you back. Growing up, my father was the only constant I had. He wasn't rich, wasn't flashy, and he never pretended to be someone he wasn't. He worked with his hands, came home smelling like sawdust and sweat, and carried the weight of responsibility without ever asking for praise. He believed in fairness, in doing things the right way, even when it cost him. My mother believed in appearances. They divorced when I was 12. I remember the exact moment he told me. We were sitting on the back porch, the sun baking the wooden steps beneath us. He stared at the ground for a long time before speaking, like he was rehearsing the words in his head. "Lynn," he said softly, "your mom and I aren't going to live together anymore." I wasn't surprised. For months, I'd heard the late-night arguments, doors slamming, voices raised, then dropped into cold, punishing silence. I'd seen him sleeping on the couch more nights than not. Even at 12, I understood more than I should have. "Is it because of money?" I asked. He looked up at me then, startled, almost sad. "You've been paying attention," he said, with a tired smile. "It's more complicated than that, but yes, that's part of it." What he didn't say, but what I would learn later, was that my mother wanted a life he refused to fake. He wasn't going to cut corners or chase status just to impress people who didn't care about him. That made him inadequate in her eyes. The divorce nearly broke him. She took everything she could, alimony that stretched his income to the breaking point, but he never complained, not once. He worked overtime, took extra contracts, fixed what he could instead of replacing it, and somehow he still made time for me. Weekends with him were simple: garage projects, fishing trips, basketball games playing quietly in the background while we sat in comfortable silence. With him, I felt safe. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, my mother introduced Charles. He was a real estate developer, confident, polished, the kind of man who wore tailored suits and talked about investments over dinner. Suddenly, my mother's life transformed overnight. A house 3 times the size of our old one, a luxury car, vacations I'd only seen in magazines. She encouraged me to call Charles Dad. I never did. A few years later came my half-siblings, first Emily, then Tyler. They became the center of her universe, the proof that she had upgraded her life successfully. Around them, she was radiant. Around me, she was distant, distracted, impatient. She changed everything about herself to fit Charles's world, her clothes, her hair, even her laugh. And when she talked about her life, it was as if the years she spent with my father were an unfortunate detour she preferred not to acknowledge. Whenever I mentioned a memory from before, she waved it off. "That was another time, Lynn," she'd say. "We've moved on." My father never asked me to forget her. "She's still your mother," he'd remind me whenever I came home upset. "You're allowed to be angry, just don't let it eat you alive." That was who he was. Even when she hurt him, he chose grace. Then, last year, everything stopped. One day, we were talking about finally taking that fishing trip to Canada he'd always wanted. The next, I was standing in a funeral home, staring at his body, trying to understand how the world could keep moving when mine had just ended. The heart attack was sudden, no warning, no goodbye. I was wrecked. But what came after was worse. His will was clear, painfully clear. Everything he owned, his house, his savings, his investments, was left to me. He had planned it that way, carefully, deliberately. "She'll come after it," he once told me quietly. "Be ready." I thought I was. Not even a week after the funeral, my mother started calling. At first, it was concern. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" Then came the guilt. "Your father wouldn't have had anything without me supporting him in the early years." And finally, the demands. "You need to do the right thing," she said one afternoon, her voice sharp beneath the sweetness. "You should split the inheritance with your family." By family, she meant herself, Charles, and their children. People who barely acknowledged my father existed. People who never visited him when he was in the hospital, who didn't return his calls, who treated him like a phase she'd outgrown. I told her no, again and again. That's when she started showing up, unannounced, uninvited, standing on my doorstep like she still owned the right to control me. One evening, after a 10-hour workday, I came home exhausted, only to find her blocking my driveway with her Mercedes. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into my small living room. She looked flawless, designer clothes, perfect makeup, but her eyes were hard, calculating. "This has gone on long enough," she said. "It's been 3 weeks. Time to be reasonable." "Reasonable?" I snapped. "Like you were reasonable when you drained him during the divorce?" Her face hardened. "That's ancient history. This is about what's fair." "No," I said quietly. "This is about what he wanted." Her expression shifted, softening into something that might have fooled someone else. "I'm worried about you," she said. "That kind of money can ruin people. You're still young." "I'm 32, I replied, "not a child." She reached for my cheek. I stepped back. Something dark flashed in her eyes. "You're choosing money over blood," she said coldly. I held the door open. "Isn't that what you did?" She left without another word. But I knew then, deep in my gut, that this wasn't over, because my mother never walked away from money, and she was just getting started. After that night, I stopped answering my mother's calls. At first, the silence felt like relief. No more passive-aggressive voicemails, no more guilt disguised as concern, just quiet. But my mother had never handled being ignored well, and I knew better than to believe she'd simply give up. She escalated. Emily, my half-sister, started leaving long, tearful messages about how I was destroying the family and how Mom was heartbroken over my selfishness. Tyler sent short, clipped texts, accusing me of thinking I was better than everyone else now. I didn't respond. Then the threats began. My mother claimed she was going to contest the will. She said she'd drag it through court for years if that's what it took. She said lawyers were already involved. She said I didn't understand how ugly this could get. What she didn't realize was that my father had prepared for this. He'd trusted one person completely when it came to legal matters, Patricia Alvarez, his attorney. She'd helped him set up his will, his investments, everything. After his death, she'd been the one steady presence reminding me that what he left behind was solid, protected, intentional. "The will is airtight," Patricia had told me during our first meeting. "Your mother has no legal claim." That knowledge was the only reason I slept at all. A week after the threat started, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. Thick, heavy, cream-colored stationery, the kind people used for weddings or formal announcements. My stomach tightened the moment I saw it. Inside was an invitation. "The Henry family requests your presence for an important family discussion." Below it, in smaller print, was a date, a time, and my mother's address. At the very bottom, the words that made my blood boil. Regarding the estate of William Henry. Not my father. Not Dad. An estate. I stood there in my apartment, invitation shaking slightly in my hands, and felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't reconciliation. This was strategy. I called my boyfriend Daniel that night. He'd been my anchor through all of this, steady, calm, never pushing me to forgive or forget. When I read the invitation aloud, he was quiet for a long moment. "Don't go," he finally said. "You don't owe them anything." "I know," I replied, pacing. "But if I don't, I'll never know what they're planning." Another pause. "Then don't go alone." That was when I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I called Patricia. She listened without interrupting as I explained everything. The invitation, the threats, the pressure. When I finished, she sighed. "This sounds like an ambush," she said flatly. "If you go, I'm coming with you." "You think it's that serious?" I asked. "Your father warned me about your mother," she replied. "He said if he died first, she'd try something like this. He asked me to make sure his wishes were respected. I intend to keep that promise. We agreed on a plan. I would arrive on time. Patricia would come a few minutes later, once the meeting had already started. No warning, no announcement. The day of the meeting, I felt sick. As I drove to my mother's house, memories rushed back. The awkward holidays, the way Charles always spoke to my father like he was beneath him, the constant comparisons between me and my half-siblings. I parked on the street instead of the driveway, giving myself an easy exit if things went bad. I barely made it 5 steps inside before I knew I was right. The living room had been rearranged to look like some kind of courtroom. My mother sat in the center, Charles beside her, smug and relaxed. Emily and Tyler were there too, sitting close together, whispering. And across from them, 2 men in suits, lawyers. No one greeted me. One of the men stood up immediately. "We're here to discuss the proper distribution of your father's assets." I almost laughed. Proper distribution? He handed me a thick stack of papers. "This is a revised agreement. It outlines a fair division of the inheritance among immediate family members." I flipped through it. They wanted 75%. The house, the savings, even my dad's car. I looked up slowly. "You've got to be kidding me." My mother sighed dramatically, as if I were being difficult on purpose. "This is the most reasonable solution. You don't need all of it, Lynn." Reasonable. They wanted to take everything my father had worked for, everything he'd deliberately left to me, and they expected me to sign it away like an obedient child. I set the papers down carefully. "Funny," I said, forcing a smile. "I brought someone too." Right on cue, the front door opened. Patricia walked in. My mother's face went pale. Patricia didn't waste time. She picked up their so-called agreement, flipped through it once, then looked up. "This is illegal," she said calmly. "But I admire the confidence." One of the lawyers cleared his throat. "We believe a redistribution is appropriate given the circumstances." "Let me stop you there," Patricia cut in. "The will is ironclad. Any attempt to contest it will fail. And if you continue trying to coerce my client into signing away her inheritance, we will pursue charges for fraud and attempted extortion." The room went dead silent. My mother's voice cut through it, sharp and desperate. "You wouldn't take your own mother to court." I met her gaze. "Try me." For the first time, she looked unsure. Finally, she leaned back and smiled. A slow, calculated smile that made my skin crawl. "All right," she said. "We won't fight it." It was too easy. As Patricia and I gathered our things, my mother called after me. "Take care of that house, sweetheart," she said softly. "You never know when accidents can happen." I froze. I didn't respond. I just walked out. But I knew, with terrifying certainty, that she wasn't finished. She'd just changed tactics. I tried to tell myself my mother was bluffing, that her parting words, "accidents can happen," were just another manipulation tactic. She'd always relied on fear when charm failed. I repeated that logic to myself like a mantra as I drove home, as I locked my apartment door, as I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling. But fear doesn't come from words alone. It comes from knowing exactly who someone is when they feel cornered. Patricia called me the next morning. "That was a threat," she said bluntly. "Document everything. Calls, texts, emails. If she shows up, record it. If anything happens to the house, call the police immediately." "You really think she'd do something?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "Your father did," Patricia replied quietly. "That's why he protected you the way he did." For the first time since the meeting, anger outweighed grief. The house, his house, had been sitting empty since his death. I hadn't been able to bring myself to move in yet. Too many memories, too much quiet. But it was still mine, and more importantly, it was his legacy. The next morning, I drove there. The moment I pulled into the driveway, my stomach dropped. The front door was wide open. I knew I'd locked it. I always did. My heart started pounding so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs as I stepped inside. The house was trashed. Couch cushions slashed open. Drawers pulled out and dumped onto the floor. Cabinet doors hanging crooked on their hinges. The framed photo of my dad and me, shattered on the hardwood. And across the living room wall, sprayed in angry red letters, was a single word. Thief. I stood there frozen, staring at it, my hands shaking. This wasn't a robbery. Nothing of value was missing. This was a message. I called the police. While I waited, I walked through the house slowly, every step feeling like a second violation. My father's bedroom had been ransacked. His clothes thrown on the floor, some cut clean through with scissors. His toolbox in the garage, dumped out, tools scattered like toys. In the kitchen, the old oak table we'd eaten at my entire childhood lay on its side, one leg snapped clean off. The refrigerator door stood open, family photos and handwritten notes torn down and shredded across the linoleum. I knelt to pick up the pieces and found part of my high school graduation photo. Just my dad's smile, torn in half. That's when I cried. Not quiet tears, not dignified ones. I sobbed on the kitchen floor, surrounded by wreckage, mourning not just the damage, but the hatred behind it. The kind of hatred that destroys memories just to cause pain. The police arrived, took notes, asked questions. Without witnesses or footage, there wasn't much they could do. I knew that. But I filed the report anyway. I wanted a record. Then I did something my mother wouldn't expect. I installed cameras, not cheap ones, not decorative ones. I went all in. High definition, night vision, motion-activated cameras covering every entrance. Front door, back door, garage, even the hallway inside. If she came back, I would know. Daniel came over that evening to help me clean. He didn't ask questions when I fell silent for long stretches. He just handed me tools, ordered food I barely touched, and stayed. "You should press charges," he said quietly as we repainted the wall where thief had been sprayed. "With what proof?" I replied. "The cops already said they can't do anything." "Then move," he suggested gently. "Sell the house. Go somewhere they can't find you." I shook my head. That's what they want, for me to give up. I pressed the roller harder against the wall. This was his house. He loved it here. I'm not letting them scare me out of it. Daniel studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Okay," he said. "Then we fight smart." That night, after he left, I sat on the porch steps where my dad and I used to sit on summer evenings. The street was quiet. The air smelled like fresh paint and cut grass. I could almost hear his voice beside me. "Stand your ground, kid." I called Patricia again and told her everything. "This is escalating," she said grimly. "Have you considered a restraining order?" "They'll deny everything," I said. "They always do." "Maybe," she admitted, "but it creates a paper trail. And if they try anything else..." "When?" I corrected. She didn't argue. 4 nights later, at 2:37 a.m., my phone buzzed on my nightstand. Motion detected. Backyard. My heart slammed into my throat as I opened the live feed. There she was. My mother. Dressed in black, moving cautiously, a flashlight in her hand. She wasn't alone. Charles stepped into frame, carrying a red canister. Gasoline. I felt the blood drain from my face. I hit record and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. "My mother and her husband are trying to burn down my house," I said, my voice eerily calm compared to the panic roaring in my head. On the screen, I watched my own mother hand Charles a lighter. Then, sirens. They heard them too. Chaos erupted. My mother grabbed the canister back and they bolted toward the street. But it was too late. Police cars screeched to a stop before they could escape. I watched everything through the camera feed as officers confronted them, as my mother screamed excuses, as the canister was inspected and confirmed to be full of fuel. They were arrested on the spot. I drove there immediately, arriving just as they were being shoved into the back of a squad car. My mother saw me and exploded. "You set me up," she screamed. "You did this to me." I looked at her, my hands steady for the first time in weeks. "No," I said quietly. "You did this to yourself." That was the last thing I ever said to her face. And it wasn't the end. Not even close. The night my mother was arrested, I didn't feel relief. I felt empty. I stood on the side of the road, the red and blue lights flashing against the dark, watching officers close the doors on the back of the squad car. My mother was still shouting, still twisting the story, still trying to make herself the victim, even with gasoline dripping down the side of the canister at her feet. She never once looked ashamed. That's when I understood something that should have been obvious years ago. She wasn't sorry. She was angry she'd been stopped. The charges came fast. Attempted arson, conspiracy to commit a felony, criminal trespass, harassment. The list kept growing as investigators reviewed the footage from my security cameras. High definition, crystal clear, impossible to explain away. Her lawyer tried to argue it was a misunderstanding, that she was checking on the property, that the gasoline was coincidental. That lie didn't last long. The judge denied bail. Apparently, being deep in debt and caught on video trying to burn down a house doesn't inspire confidence. She was remanded into custody to await trial. Charles joined her 2 days later, his face gray, his confidence gone. The silence afterward was deafening. No more calls. No more threats. No more guilt-laced voicemails. Just quiet. The next few months passed in a blur of court dates, meetings with Patricia, and paperwork. I barely recognized my own life. Everything revolved around preparing for trial, documenting, remembering, reliving. Emily left a voicemail a week after the arrest. She cried. Said she had no idea Mom was capable of something like that. Said she hoped we could still be sisters. I didn't respond. Tyler sent a single text. Didn't know about the fire thing. Hope you're okay. I left him on read. They might not have held the gasoline, but they'd stood behind her while she tried to steal from me. The moment it stopped benefiting them, they disappeared. That told me everything I needed to know. The trial took 6 months. My mother tried everything. First, she denied knowing the canister contained fuel. Then she claimed Charles acted alone. Then she accused me of setting her up, said I'd planted evidence, manipulated footage, lured her there. That theory collapsed the moment the prosecutor played the security video. There she was, unmistakable, pointing, directing, handing over the lighter. The jury didn't deliberate long. 2 hours. Guilty. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Charles received 12. They appealed. They lost. When it was finally over, I expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I felt tired. Grief doesn't disappear just because justice arrives. It just changes shape. I spent weeks afterward cleaning and repairing the house. Not because it needed fixing, but because I did. Every broken frame replaced, every wall repainted, every room reclaimed. I found a photo of my dad from my college graduation and framed it again. Hung it in the living room where it belonged. I moved in a month later. The first night, I barely slept. The house creaked and settled around me, unfamiliar but comforting. By morning, I was sitting on the porch with a mug of coffee, watching sunlight spill across the yard. That was when it finally felt like mine. Patricia still checks in from time to time. During our last call, she paused before hanging up. "Your father would be proud of you, Lynn," she said. I believe her. I invested most of the inheritance the way he would have wanted, carefully, responsibly. Some of it went to causes he believed in. The rest is for the future. A future built on stability, not greed. Sometimes I think about what could have happened if my mother had just been decent. If she'd respected his wishes. If she'd chosen love over entitlement. But then I remember what my dad always told me. You can't control who people are, only how you respond. I didn't respond with cruelty. I responded with boundaries. I protected what he built. I refused to let bitterness rot me from the inside out the way it rotted her. Now, every morning, I drink coffee on the porch where we used to sit. Every evening, I work in the garage, finishing projects he never got around to completing. This house isn't just an inheritance. It's proof. Proof that integrity outlasts greed. Proof that love survives even the ugliest betrayals. Proof that family is defined by respect, not blood. That's the legacy my father left me, and it's the one thing my mother could never steal.